On today's show, the Blake Butera era starts in Washington. Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Talk Nats. And the best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe to the Talk Nats podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find your podcast. Give it a 5-star rating, leave some comments, and tell your friends. I sure would appreciate it. So I come to you in this off-season edition of the Talk Nats podcast, and from time to time, I like to hop on YouTube, primarily an audio podcast. So if you are watching this on YouTube, do me a favor and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts, because that is ultimately where you will find this show most of the time. But in this edition, things are changing in Washington. And ultimately, I like the moves that I've seen so far, I guess, right? I guess we don't really know how the manager Blake Butera is going to pan out. It's a feel-good story for sure, right? That the youngest coach, the youngest manager rather, in the bigs. But how is that going to translate to wins and losses? And that's what I'm waiting to see. And ultimately, as far as Toboni is concerned, I'm waiting for him to make his big stamp move. Like, yes, we're that serious about winning baseball games, because right now, and one of the things he talked about was moving the big rocks first. I think that setting up the infrastructure was of paramount importance, right? And he did that. But now it's time. There are still some spots to fill as far as the executives are concerned, but I want to get to the task at hand, and that is filling out this roster. And something that makes me as a Nationals fan feel like, yes, they are going to be better next season because a manager, cannot win you games. He can help you win games, but he cannot be the one to win games. So I like the addition of Toboni, right? I like the addition that we've seen so far with Butera, but I want to see the pieces that were missing on the Nationals last year. And I'm going to start with, the big marquee, type. I want a big starting veteran pitcher to help anchor it down, because the rumor mills are swirling out there about Mackenzie Gore, who we know could potentially be on the move, being a Boris client and everything. And already names being associated. Before I hit the record button here, there was talk about the Dodgers and the kind of deal that the Nationals would get for a trade. So there's many positions that need to get filled, and I will talk about that in my other podcast as well, the Believe in Nationals podcast. Yes, Believe came to me, and they said that we want this to be the home for Nationals coverage. So, of course, the Talk Nats podcast is one that I'll come to, but I'll also come to you on the Believe in Nationals podcast. That is an audio podcast only, where I will give you different stories. So I am going to try to blanket you with as much Nationals news as I possibly can. And I'll do it, primarily weekly, unless big news breaks. And then once the baseball season starts, if you don't know, I cover the Capitals 5 days a week. So that does take up a bit of my time during the hockey season. But make no mistake about it, I'm still a big-time Nationals fan. So let's stop talking about all that. Let's start talking about the introductory press conference where Butera was formally announced as the next manager of your favorite team and mine, the Washington Nationals. A new father. You look at him, he looks like he could be much younger. And I don't want to be ageist. I really don't. Some people are like, they should have really given it to a 40 or 50-year-old guy, someone that's been around the block. Yeah, because the recycle bin always pays dividends, right? So I am going to lean into this positively. I am going to give him the benefit of the doubt until I see that there's a reason not to. But so far, what we've at least heard, it does seem like it's a good fit. So let's dive into that in the first segment here. Blake Butera being 33 and stepping in as the Nats manager tells you exactly what this front office wants. And it should make you lean in, not panic, to what is next for this team. So, like I said, right off the bat, he is 33, and, that is young. And, listening to another podcast, they were talking about that he had never even sat in an MLB dugout until this moment. I saw there was a photo op where he was sitting in the Nationals dugout there. But again, there's a belief and a reason behind it, and I will dive into that in this segment. And that does make him the youngest manager in the big leagues right now and the youngest Nationals skipper in decades. The headline age is the thing people want to tweet about, call into talk radio about, freak out about, whatever. But when you actually listen to his introduction and listen to how Paul Toboni framed the hire, the age is the part of the plan. And why? Well, Paul Toboni is a younger man himself. And, being a guy that's in his late 40s, it's easy to kind of, what are these young guys doing? They don't know anything. I'm here to tell you, in my 9-to-5 job, I work with a lot of young people. In a lot of ways, the younger people are much better. They learn things much quicker. That, it's an old person's thing to want to cast shade on young people. I'm leaning into Paul Toboni. I am leaning into Blake Butera, and I'm excited about what it means. If you didn't know, he comes out of the Rays system where development is everything. Doesn't always pay dividends, of course, as we know that it's generally not a really great baseball team, and everything that's going on with where they're playing the game, having to play your season in a minor league arena or stadium is not ideal. But in any event, it is an organization that is always near the top of player development. And I love that. I absolutely love it, because you want to talk about old, you want to talk about curmudgeonly, then take a look at Rizzo and take a look at Davey Martinez, and not to say anything other than it appeared that they were stuck in their ways. They did not lean into the analytics. They did not lean into as much of player development. And the thing I like about Blake is that he was that player not too long ago. So relatability should not be an issue at all. He has a track record leading younger players in building pro habits in the minors. So why is that the feature? Because the Nationals are rebuilding through their young roster. We know that this is a team. Yes, it's still in rebuild. I'm still talking to you about a Nationals rebuild. We saw Dylan Cruz. We saw James Wood. We saw Robert Hassel III. We did see, some younger players, not to mention not too long ago, CJ Abrams and these kind of players. And it's not just that. It's the players in the minors as well that are on the cusp of making this team better. And it's hard for me sometimes, because I come to you on this podcast saying, be patient. They'll be better at some point. I want to come to you at some point and going, the Nationals have arrived, right? They're at least playing 500 ball. They're at least, contending for a playoff spot. That 2019 was not that long ago, even though, it's been a bit here, that I want to bring back prominence to DC here. Because like I said, the Nationals are building through their young roster. You do not pair development-heavy front office with a crusty old school manager who only cares about short-term bumps. And they did hire an experienced bench boss. So I do like that. You pair it with someone who can speak the same language as the kids and who lives and breathes development day to day. The hard thing I think he's going to have to overcome is that he's their age. And I think that for some young players, it's easy to listen to older managers maybe better, or, they're more serious, that it's a very fine line for Blake to not be one of their friends. Be relatable, have an open door policy, but don't try to be one of them. Think Spencer Carberry with the Capitals, a younger-ish coach, has a great rapport, but you still know who runs the team. At his press conference, Butera talked about process, daily standards, and relationships. He kept bringing things back to helping people get better as players and humans. That is something that I don't think was as important to the older managers, but I think is important. And, just based on the fact that I talk about hockey so much and the Capitals, you see that with the Capitals, the rapport between Spencer and his players. That is a part of him being younger-ish, even though he's in his 40s, that, the older guys necessarily maybe don't have in their skill set. And that's an important thing there. He kept bringing back helping people get better as players and humans. And that matters because buy-in matters. You want to have trust in the guy who is managing your team. That's my manager. He is going to do the best that he can to help us win games. If the manager is aligned with the front office, the pitchers and position players get consistent messages. That helps prospects turn into stories you can tell on a post-game show, and that helps veterans find their groove too. And it's something that I look forward to come all of you about how great the relationship is and how Butera and the other coaches really elevated the younger players that needed a little bit more cooking, but maybe Davey or Rizzo didn't understand. Now, some fans will say we need wins now, and I get that. But it is a building process, right? This is not something that is going to happen overnight. But the evidence from other clubs and clear younger managers with strong player development backgrounds often raise the floor for younger rosters. So yeah, the age gap is a thing, and stop treating it like a problem. Treat it like an intentional piece of a larger plan, and that's the hope, right, folks? That this is all a part of a bigger plan of bringing winning baseball back to DC. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Toboni's overhaul is deep, structural, and fast. Straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. Again, check out my other show on the Believe Network called the Believe in Nationals podcast. I'm trying to have you guys covered from every angle, talking about DC baseball. So let's dive into it here in segment 2. And it's Toboni. And, it is saying goodbye to Rizzo and not looking at it like, he was a poor GM of this team, but the excitement. And I want to remember the excitement that I felt when I found out, I hate to say it, that when Rizzo was no longer here and when Davey Martinez was no longer here, because I'm going to be honest with you, I would have had a hard time feeling confident or hopeful about next season because it would just seem like retreading a tire, right? That Rizzo goes out and signs a player to this, stopgap deal, right? That good enough until this guy's ready. And we've seen that for the last couple of years, and it has not paid off for the Nationals. As a parent, when you take a look at the standings, not being competitive in quite some time, that this new era of Toboni and Butera has me excited. And I say excited in November when it is still a bit of time before there is baseball to be played here. But the biggest takeaway, Toboni's overhaul, is not rearranging deck chairs. He is re-engineering the ship. And this will show up in staff development and how the Nats approach the roster. That is the main event. You brought in a manager that no one really knew about unless you're an extreme baseball nerd. And also talk about the other additions a bit later here as well. But you didn't make any big acquisitions, something to put your stamp, your seal, your brand on this organization to say, yeah, I'm that kind of guy. I got that kind of pull. And Toboni's comments since arriving have been about sweeping changes, not tiny tweaks. He's adding staff, expanding development resources, and rethinking roles in the organization. And that's exactly what you want to hear if your goal is to build sustainable success. Again, I don't want to be in win now mode. I do not want to be. I want there to be, winning brand of baseball year after year. And think about the levers he has to pull: coaching staff composition, player development hires, analytics resources, scouting emphasis, 40-man roster, Rule 5 planning, and minor league coaching pipelines. Yes, to say he has a lot on his plate would be an understatement. But I think he's the guy. And it's not like he came, I would be concerned, I hate to say, if he came from an organization that, is horrible. Take a look at the Pirates just off the top of my head. If they're like, oh, they hired this guy that they were high on from the Pirates, I'm like, no, thank you. He comes from the Red Sox, historically have had a good ball club, like a lot of other teams have had their hiccups as well. But he has been, a key ingredient in Boston, and I look for him to be a key ingredient in Washington as well. And at the press conference, Toboni shared the stage with Butera. That wasn't an accident. That was the front office and the manager showing a unified message from day one that this is not just going to be Butera. This is going to be Toboni and whoever else in between there making moves, making this team better. And I think that is also a younger players and leaders' role, is to get your input from your manager and GM, and however that shakes out. That it's not going to be, I am the king sitting on top of the mountain and I'm going to give you these players and do what you will with them. There's going to be some of that, but I think, and I've heard that he will seek input as well. Now, practically, this means we should expect some short-term pain for the long-term gain. Yes, I hate to say that because I've said that for seasons. You'll see more players brought in who fit the process. You'll see investments in coaches that can teach as much as they can motivate. And I want to pause on one practical piece that matters a lot. Toboni and Butera are already discussing staff retention and changes around the pitching staff. We heard about Doolittle, that there's not a lot of pieces that were kept, but Doolittle is one name that I heard will be hanging around and is remaining in some capacity, while other parts of the staff got retooled. And, listening to the guys that cover this team, have covered this team, write for this team for a long time, they felt bad because a lot of the faces didn't really have a whole lot to do with it, that they weren't really associated with Rizzo. They were just a part of the Nationals machine. And well, they got caught up in the combine and were spit out and, are probably looking for new jobs. Some of those, managers and leaders have already are at their next destination. And at the end of the day, I wish them nothing but the best. Now, that specific example shows the approach: retain relationships and institutional knowledge where it helps, and now add new voices where the club needs fresh rethinking. This is a surgical, not a scorched earth approach. That it wasn't Toboni coming in here and going, I'm getting rid of everybody. Everybody's must go. That wasn't the case. For fans, here is where patience plays metrics. You watch player development and growth. You watch the development signals, and you watch the front office making trades and signings that align with the plan. Guys with good upside, younger guys that might need a little bit of development. I know that it's not following the script of, say, the Dodgers or the Yankees, where they're just like, I want a developed player, and I'm going to treat the MLB at large as my minor league system, and I'm going to pluck them from the small market teams, see Twins and Pirates and these kind of teams. And that's the case. We have seen that. And I already talked about earlier that, there's talk about the Dodgers trying to pluck Mackenzie Gore. I think that, trying to build, a long-term plan of success is more advantageous than win now. Win now feels good. It feels satisfying. It is finding a girlfriend for the night and not finding a wife, right? That it might feel good in the moment, but is it overall good for your overall health and well-being? I think that, that's the case. I think that's where the Nationals are at. And I like what they've done. I think they've put the good pieces in place. And another storyline that I want to follow is, how much leeway and how much is the learners going to allow Toboni to spend, right? That's the big thing as well, that seeing is believing. Why wasn't Rizzo able to spend money? Why is Toboni able to spend money if that's the case? And if they do lean into a player development and AI and all these different player development metrics or type situations, why didn't Rizzo do that, right? And that's the big thing that I think that a lot of questions will be answered that, we see why Rizzo wasn't able to do a lot and why Toboni is struggling. But if Toboni is able to do all of these things at the end of the day, was Rizzo just lazy? Things to think about here. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Butera's character and how his communication could anchor the Nationals' new culture. Straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the TalkNats podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. Again, check us out online at TalkNats. Also, check out the audio podcast, Believe in Nationals podcast. And this is primarily the TalkNats podcast, an audio podcast as well. But every once in a while, when I got a little bit of time, I like to hop on in a video format and talk to you guys. So make sure and subscribe on YouTube as well. All right, in the final segment of today's show, we are talking about Butera, his character and communication, and a change of culture. And when I say change of culture, like I said, I think Davey was good with the players for a long time. I think that he got frustrated in the last couple of years, but I think big picture, he was the right coach for the Nationals at one time. It's just that ship had sailed, and I think that he could only do with what the players he was allotted. So that's the old era. We need to build a new culture. That is why Butera, a young guy leading a young team, makes a lot of sense. In his press conference, he said things that on the surface sound simple. But in practice, they are huge because culture is not built by slogan. It is built by interactions. He emphasized being accessible, being consistent, and building relationships. Again, I keep circling back to this. That is what makes this move, at least on paper, perfect for me. That, in older coaches, it was my way or the highway. And I think that the younger players, that's not the way they were raised. They weren't raised my way or the highway per se. That I think that building a relationship, building a rapport, but being a leader, right? You definitely have to establish who's in charge. He emphasized being accessible, being consistent. That indicates he wants a clubhouse where guys are not afraid to fail and learn. Like, oh my God, I had a bad game. I'm done. My major league career is over. I'm going back to the minors. Not the case. Also, a side note, Human Moment, which I loved, his introductory press conference was delayed because his daughter was born around the same time. Feel good. As having two daughters myself, I can relate. And it changes your life. And it's no doubt going to change his life, but I think in a good way. He will definitely circle this time in his life when he's much older as a turning point. I became a new dad. I became a manager of a Major League Baseball team. Definitely something that he will remember forever. And, that moment tells you something about priorities and being extremely relatable to me as a dad as well. Coaches who care about players beyond the stat line creates trust. Trust reduces friction. Less friction means players adopt new processes faster, and that accelerates development. And also, let's talk examples, concrete things to watch to see if the culture is taking hold. One, are the young players getting clear individual development plans and measurable checkpoints? Not like, we're throwing Dylan Cruz out there in the outfield because he was, drafted this way, or we're putting, James Wood out there that maybe, right? But you want to set your players up to succeed. Put your aces in your places and be willing to change. And that's the thing I think I'm going to like about Butera as well, is that he's not stuck in his ways because, well, this is his first gig. So there is at least something refreshing in that. Two, are veterans publicly supporting the process and speaking to younger players in the media? The good thing about the Nationals is that there's not a lot of older players, that it is a buy-in from a primarily young team. So that is something that's encouraging. But for the older players, they're going to have to respect the younger guy. And I've, had issues with that in my life as well. Not that I didn't respect, but maybe I second guessed their judgment because I had been there and done that. It's all nonsense at the end of the day. Three, do we see coaching continuity across all levels where minor league emphasizes matches big league messages, so that when these players get called up, that it's seamless, not like, oh, well, you do things this way and we do things that way, that there's not this learning curve, that it is a seamless integration. And if you see yes, yes, and yes to those three, you'll know this is working on a cultural front. From a podcaster's point of view, that matters because storylines change. I am going to have much to talk to you guys about all winter long. And as the season approaches, again, I thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast or watching this. And if you're new to the podcast, make sure and follow, subscribe on your podcatcher of choice. Of course, we know Apple and Spotify are the big ones out there. That the podcast landscape has changed, and there's not a lot of incentive to do these podcasts, say that there was about 5 years ago or so. So make sure and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it makes the Talk Nats podcast sustainable and the Believe in Nationals podcast sustainable. But all things considered, I am feeling optimistic about this season. And, it's kind of unfounded, I guess, at the end of the day. It's just me looking at it like he's done nothing wrong so far, that I can't discredit him here or there, that I am going to put my faith in that he is going to make this team better, with the understanding that it might not happen tomorrow, the next day. It might take a couple seasons. And that hurts to me more than anything, because I feel like we wasted the last few years, to be honest with you. The last, I'm going to say 2 to 3 seasons have been squandered as far as I'm concerned. We have seen no development to speak of, really. We have seen younger players on the big team. I'm talking, Cruz and Wood. The players I'm talking about. CJ Abrams showing flashes of greatness. But you think to yourself, especially for a guy like CJ and, perhaps Keibert Ruiz, for example, 2 players that have been here for a bit, but, the high hopes for, that maybe they had the wrong leaders, and maybe they're set back a couple seasons, that, maybe now with Toboni and Butera and all the new coaches that are going to be on this team, maybe they can get him in the right direction in one breath. In the second breath, I don't want to live in the land of woulda, shoulda, coulda. For me, though, at the end of the day, this just screams to me something that should have been done seasons ago. Listen, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. And again, check out our friends at talknats.com. Also find them on Twitter at talknats. They talk Nationals all season long. There's never an off season on TalkNats, so check those guys out. TalkNats.com and on Twitter at TalkNats. Listen, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the TalkNats podcast, and I'll talk to you again next time.